The host wanted to make an example. Out of Eastwood instead, he became the perfect example of why people don't trust mainstream media anymore. The studio lights were bright, too bright, the kind that made people sweat even when they weren't nervous. But Clint Eastwood wasn't nervous. He sat back in the chair, legs apart, shoulders relaxed, waiting. The audience murmured in anticipation, some clutching their phones, already poised to record. They knew something was about to happen. Across from him sat Jackson Harper, a polished, sharp-dressed TV host known for his progressive slant and his love of gotcha moments. He leaned forward, a smug grin creeping across his face. He had interviewed politicians, activists, and Hollywood elites, always managing to get them to stumble. But Eastwood, that was new territory. "Mr. Eastwood," Jackson started, his voice smooth and rehearsed, "you've always been a symbol of American toughness, but do you think that kind of masculinity is outdated? I mean, in today's world, don't you think we should redefine strength to be more inclusive?" A few audience members chuckled, some nodded in agreement. Jackson's fans, the kind who expected him to trap his guests in their own words, waited eagerly. Eastwood blinked slowly and deliberately. Then he leaned in, elbows on his knees, and exhaled through his nose. "You mean, do I think being tough is a bad thing now?" Jackson smirked. "Well, I think we're past the era where men need to punch their way through problems. Don't you think the world has moved on from that kind of outdated thinking? Silence, the kind that stretches long enough to make people shift in their seats." Eastwood scratched his chin, then he laughed. Not a polite chuckle, but a deep, genuine belly laugh. "You're serious? You think toughness is a problem?" Jackson straightened his tie. "I think it can be toxic when it discourages vulnerability." Eastwood nodded slowly, processing. Then he leaned back, stretching his arms across the back of his chair. "Let me ask you something," he said, voice low and deliberate. "If someone broke into your house tonight, do you want a tough guy in there, or do you want someone who's gonna sit down and talk about their feelings?" The audience let out a few gasps, a few scattered claps. Jackson opened his mouth, but Eastwood wasn't done. "See, toughness ain't about punching walls or yelling the loudest. It's about standing your ground when life knocks you down. It's about protecting your family. It's about discipline, respect, hard work. And if you think the world doesn't need that anymore, I don't know what world you're living in, man." Jackson forced a chuckle, but there was a flicker of hesitation behind his eyes. He hadn't expected Eastwood to hit back so fast, but he wasn't giving up that easily. "All right," Jackson said, shifting in his seat, "but don't you think Hollywood, and let's be honest, your own movies, have glorified violence as the only solution to problems?" Eastwood didn't hesitate. "Hollywood glorifies a lot of things. Ever seen a movie where a guy saves the world by filling out paperwork?" Laughter this time, real laughter. Even some of Jackson's crew members smirked. But Jackson wasn't done. He still had more tricks up his sleeve. Eastwood, however, was just getting warmed up. Jackson straightened his posture, adjusting the stack of cue cards on his lap, as if searching for the perfect counterpunch. He was good at this, controlling the tempo, leading his guests down a path where they had no choice but to stumble. But Eastwood wasn't playing along. "All right, let's talk about influence," Jackson said, flipping through his notes. "You've built a career playing tough, no-nonsense characters, guys who solve problems with their fists, guns, or just brute force. Do you ever think about the message that sends? I mean, don't you feel the responsibility to promote a more progressive kind of hero?" Eastwood sat up, stretching his shoulders like a boxer getting ready for the next round. "First of all," he said, voice steady, "I make movies. Movies ain't real, you know that, right?" He raised an eyebrow. "Last time I checked, I never actually went 15 rounds with Apollo Creed, never took down a whole army with a red bandana and a knife, never ran up those steps in Philly and single-handedly fixed people's problems." A few people in the crowd laughed, but Jackson stayed firm. "Sure, But movies shape culture. Kids grew up watching Clint Eastwood and Sylvester Stallone. Don't you think we should be giving them heroes who solve problems without violence? Eastwood exhaled through his nose. Man, you ever seen a Rocky movie? He shook his head. That whole movie was about getting back up when life knocks you down. It wasn't about beating people up. It was about heart and perseverance. And Rambo, he was just trying to be left alone. If people had just let him walk through town and mind his business, none of that would have happened. The audience clapped a little louder this time. Jackson's jaw clenched. He knew this wasn't going the way he had planned. So he leaned forward, speaking softer and more personal. Okay, fair enough. But let's talk about the real world. Let's talk about America right now. We're at a point where people are questioning what it means to be a man, what it means to be tough. Some might argue that your version of toughness, the old school don't show weakness kind, is part of the problem, that it creates more division than unity. What do you say to that? Eastwood let the question hang in the air. He tapped his fingers on the armrest, eyes locked on Jackson. You ever meet a firefighter? He asked. Jackson blinked. Excuse me, a firefighter, a cop, a guy in the military, hell, even a single mom working 2 jobs just to keep food on the table? You ever talk to those people? You think toughness is their problem? Eastwood shook his head. No, man, their toughness is what keeps the world running. The problem ain't toughness. The problem is people thinking strength is something bad. Like it's dangerous. Weakness ain't a virtue, pal. Strength with control, that's what keeps people safe. Somewhere in the back, a man let out a low whistle. The energy in the room had shifted. Jackson was losing his grip, but he wasn't giving up. What about... Eastwood raised a hand, cutting him off. Not aggressively, just enough to make it clear he wasn't finished. You want to know the real problem? It's not toughness. It's people who talk about toughness like it's the enemy, while living in a world built and protected by tough people. You sit here in your nice suit with your scripted questions, trying to tell me what's outdated. Let me tell you something, man. If the world ever really goes sideways, if things get bad, you're gonna be real happy there are still guys like me around. Dead silence. Jackson swallowed. He had another question lined up. Another attempt to regain control. But the audience had shifted. They weren't nodding with him anymore. They were waiting for Eastwood's next words. And Eastwood wasn't letting up anytime soon. Jackson shifted in his seat. The energy in the room was slipping from his grip, and he knew it. This wasn't going the way it was supposed to. Eastwood wasn't fumbling. He wasn't tripping over his words or getting defensive. He was owning the room, and now the audience wasn't just listening, they were rooting for him. Jackson forced a smile, trying to regain control. I hear you, I do, he said, voice measured. But let's be honest, there's a difference between being strong and refusing to change. A lot of people would say that you're kind of thinking this old-school mindset is what's holding society back. Don't you think it's time to move forward? Eastwood exhaled slowly, his gaze steady. He could have come back with another joke, another sharp one-liner, but instead his tone shifted, calm, almost reflective. You ever seen a building being torn down? He asked. Jackson blinked. What? A demolition? You ever watch one? Jackson hesitated. Yeah. Eastwood nodded. Takes what? A few seconds to bring it down. A couple charges, a button press, and boom, it's gone. He clasped his hands together. But you ever see one being built? Jackson didn't answer. That takes years, brick by brick, steel by steel, men working day and night, laying the foundation, making sure it can hold up. Now the people with the detonators, they don't care about that. They don't think about the work, the sweat, the people who risk their lives to build it. They just want to see it come crashing down. The audience was locked in. Nobody moved. You say moving forward, Eastwood said, but moving where? Forward ain't always the right direction. Sometimes people get so caught up in change, they don't even stop to think about what they're tearing down. They don't ask if what they're breaking might actually be worth keeping. Jackson licked his lips. He could feel the weight of the moment. He had gone into this interview expecting an easy target, a celebrity who would crack under pressure, a man who could be reduced to a caricature. But Eastwood was proving him wrong, and worse, the audience knew it. "All right," Jackson said, forcing a chuckle. "That's an interesting perspective. But let's be real. Society has changed. We don't live in the same world we did when you made Dirty Harry. People are more aware now. We're thinking critically about gender roles, systemic issues," Eastwood interrupted, raising an eyebrow. "Thinking critically or just criticizing?" The crowd erupted. Some clapped, others gasped. Even Jackson's own camera crew exchanged looks. This wasn't just an interview anymore, this was a battle. Jackson held up his hands, trying to regain his composure. Okay. Let me ask you this. If strength, if toughness is so important, why do you think so many people push back against it? Why do so many people feel like it's outdated?" Eastwood let the question hang in the air for a beat before leaning in, voice lower now, almost conspiratorial. "Because weak people don't like being reminded they're weak." The crowd exploded. Some stood up clapping, others just sat there stunned. Jackson opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Eastwood let the reaction ride out before sitting back. "Look," he said, "I ain't saying everybody needs to be some action hero. I'm saying life's gonna throw punches, whether you like it or not. And when it does, the world ain't gonna care about your feelings. It's gonna ask you one question: can you take the hit and keep moving forward?" Jackson had nothing. No quip, no comeback. Just silence. But outside of that studio, something even bigger was happening. Because the second that moment hit the internet, everything changed. The moment the interview ended, Jackson barely managed to keep his professional smile intact as the cameras cut. But Eastwood simply stood, stretched his shoulders, and gave the audience a small wave before walking off the set like nothing had happened. Backstage, producers scrambled. Jackson's earpiece buzzed with frantic voices. That did not go as planned. Social media is already picking it up. Cut the controversial parts before we post it online. But it was too late. Someone in the live audience had already uploaded clips. Within minutes, the internet was on fire. Clint Eastwood slams woke media in live debate. Clint Eastwood destroys woke media in live interview. Videos spread like wildfire, jumping from Twitter to Facebook to YouTube. People clipped the best moments, overlaying reaction memes, slow motion replays, and even dramatic background music. Within hours, the clip was trending #1, and the comment section became a battleground. "I don't even like Eastwood's movies, but this was incredible. He said what everyone's been thinking but too scared to say." Notice how the host had nothing when Eastwood turned the tables. Classic. Of course, the backlash wasn't far behind. Just another aging celebrity stuck in the past. Toxic masculinity at its finest. Can we stop pretending this guy is some intellectual? Jackson's network scrambled for damage control. They released a carefully worded statement about how differing opinions spark meaningful conversations. Jackson himself went on Twitter posting, "Healthy debate is important. I respect Mr. Eastwood's views, even if I don't agree. Let's keep the conversation civil," but no one cared. The internet had already decided who won. Meanwhile, Eastwood didn't post a single thing. No tweets, no press statements. He simply went about his day, unbothered. Unlike the people arguing, in the comment sections, he had nothing to prove. As the dust settled, a much bigger question started floating around. Was this just a viral moment, or had Eastwood exposed something deeper about modern media? Days passed, but the clip refused to die down. It was everywhere, in morning shows, podcasts, even news segments, dissecting what it all meant. Some called it a wake-up call, others labeled it a manufactured controversy. But one thing was clear. People weren't just talking about Eastwood. They were talking about something bigger. On one side, people were saying Eastwood had exposed the hypocrisy of modern media, how hosts like Jackson love to push an agenda but fold the second they're challenged. They expect celebrities to just nod along, but the moment someone thinks for themselves, they freak out. On the other side, critics argued that Eastwood was just another rich actor clinging to outdated ideas. It's easy to preach toughness when you're living in a mansion. But then something interesting happened. Firefighters, police officers, military vets, factory workers, construction crews, single moms, people who actually knew what toughness looked like in the real world, started speaking up. A viral Facebook post from a retired Marine went everywhere. Eastwood gets it. Strength isn't about being a bully. It's about standing up when life knocks you down. We need more of that. A mother from Oklahoma shared a video. I raised 3 boys on my own. If I hadn't been tough, they wouldn't have eaten. Don't tell me strength is a bad thing. Even a quiet clip of an older man at a gas station went viral. He was watching the interview on his phone, shaking his head. These kids don't know what real struggle is. They think life's about debating nonsense on TV. Eastwood understands real life. Jackson, meanwhile, went silent. The network kept pushing other stories to shift attention, but it didn't work. Every attempt to move on was met with one question over and over again. Why did a Hollywood actor have more common sense than a professional journalist? And that's when the real conversation began. Not about Eastwood, not about the interview, but about the bigger picture. Had modern society really gone soft? Were people so afraid of real strength that they wanted to pretend it wasn't necessary? Was the media actually shaping culture or just controlling it? These weren't just viral talking points anymore. They were dinner table conversations. People weren't just watching, they were waking up, and Eastwood still hadn't said a word. A week later, Eastwood finally spoke. Not through a press release, not on social media. It was during a casual interview in a small gym in San Diego, California. A local reporter asked him about the viral moment, expecting some kind of damage control. Instead, Eastwood wiped the sweat from his forehead, took a sip from his water bottle, and shrugged. Look, man, I wasn't trying to prove anything. I was just being honest, the reporter pressed. But did you expect the reaction to be this huge? Eastwood chuckled. I've been around a long time. People always act surprised when someone tells the truth. That's the world we live in now. The simplicity of his response hit harder than any speech. No grand statement, no victory lap, just a man who said what he believed and moved on. But the real impact was still unfolding. Jackson Harper's show saw a ratings drop. His network quietly pushed him into different segments, away from high-profile interviews. He wasn't cancelled, but he wasn't the same rising star either. Meanwhile, something unexpected started happening. People began re-watching Eastwood's old interviews, his speeches, even his movies, seeing them in a new light. Clips of Dirty Harry's famous monologue resurfaced. It ain't about how hard you hit, it's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. People started using it in discussions about grit, resilience, and real strength. And outside the online debates, in the real world, something shifted. Young men started showing up at boxing gyms, pushing themselves harder. Parents talked about teaching their kids discipline instead of entitlement. Workers found themselves standing a little taller, pushing through struggles instead of complaining about them. Not because Eastwood told them to, but because they saw the difference between real strength and performative weakness. In the end, this wasn't about one interview. It wasn't about Eastwood versus Jackson Harper. It was about a world that had forgotten what toughness actually meant, and one man who reminded them. If you made it this far, ask yourself, what kind of strength do you value? Is it the kind that folds the moment it's questioned, or the kind that stands firm when it matters most? Because at the end of the day, toughness isn't about muscles. It's about who you are when no one's watching. Like what you heard? Subscribe. for more stories that make you think, because in a world full of noise, the truth still matters.